members talking about good fiscal policy, like we've done in the state of Wisconsin and many others have done across the country.
Well, Governor Walker, it's great to have you on. What did you do to the Wall Street Journal to get them so mad at you? I mean, I read that editorial on Saturday, and I cut it out, and I wanted to underline some points to raise with you today, knowing I was going to have you on the show, but the whole editorial seemed incoherent to me.
Well, it was unusual. I mean, I've had many a times, and I should, hat tip to them where they've been right when defending me when the unions came out with nonsense and some of the other crazy things that have happened in the state of Wisconsin over the years. But in this one, I mean, just really wrong on so many different levels. My position on immigration is simple. Besides starting out with where I think everybody's at, you got to secure the border, and that's a much more important issue than just immigration because of the issues happening on the border. But you secure the border, you enforce the law by having an effective E-Verify system that every employer in America uses, and that you make it easy to use so small businesses and farmers and ranchers don't have a burden. And then I said, no amnesty. If you want to be a citizen, that's a whole different thing. You got to go back to your country of origin and get back in line like anybody else. But I said for legal immigration, right now there are restrictions in America. That column and others acted like there's no restrictions. There are restrictions on legal immigration today. They just don't make a whole lot of sense. And so what I've said is the economy should drive our decisions, not only on this, but on just about every other fiscal and economic decision we make. A strong economy should be paramount. And priority number one in that regard should be making sure that we think about the impact on American workers and American wages. If you do that, it's real simple. When unemployment is high and labor participation rates are low, you don't have very much immigration because you don't want to flood the market. If over time unemployment goes down and, which we haven't had yet, labor participation rates go up, meaning people are working because they're working in jobs, not because they stopped looking for jobs.
The Wall Street Journal
then you could change things.
The Wall Street Journal had to overlook what they were angry about the fact that you said that legal immigration should reflect the needs of the nation rather than the needs of the immigrants, and also should be good for the working people, the people who are looking for jobs in the United States, and they just totally overlooked everything you said and just engaged in this kind of weird screed about
the stuff about STEM. I mean, I'm all for STEM. I've advocated in my own state. I pushed it in our technical colleges, in our K through 12, in our high schools and junior highs. That's besides the point. Yeah,
STEM
we
means
need more STEM,
science,
we need to do it
technology.
more in American schools right now, where so many of our jobs are in industrial manufacturing and advanced manufacturing and IT and other areas. But that's a whole sidebar issue that's kind of a distraction from what I was saying. I just said make American workers and their wages your number one priority.
Well, the Wall Street Journal,
whether it's on immigration, on tax policy, on regulations, on welfare reform, on entitlement reform, if we're always thinking about the impact on the hardworking American, we're going to be fine. And when we don't think about that, well, then we get bad policies in America.
Well, we talk a lot about the H-1B visas on this show, and they have cost Americans their jobs, and we all know people who have worked at companies where they brought in people, foreigners with H-1B visas to take the place of American citizens. The American citizens had to train them before they were fired. They worked for a fraction of what Americans do, and the Wall Street Journal just pretends that this doesn't exist, that there is nothing, that this isn't going on, and it's amazing. And then they said, here was one sentence that really perplexed me. If more people, even people with skills such as those on H-1B visas are bad for an economy, why is the high growth state of Texas working overtime to get people from other parts of the country to move there? What?
Yeah, that to me didn't make any sense. The reason they're doing that is because the economy is growing, not because they're bringing people in. People are coming because the economy is stronger and people want to work and live there because of things like lower, in this case, no income taxes, reasonable cost, lower cost when it comes to regulation and litigation, things that we've tried to do in the state of Wisconsin and many other key battleground states have done over the last 4 or 5 years under common sense Republican reform leadership.
We're speaking to Governor Scott Walker. He's in Massachusetts today, and he just came back from Iowa where he's been campaigning. Governor Walker, let's talk about first of all, thank you though for doing that, speaking out for the American workers, and the fact that they're so hysterical just shows you how empty their arguments are. And then I saw your hometown newspaper, the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel was attacking you basically for talking to Senator Jeff Sessions. Only they didn't even know he was a senator. They called him a congressman.
This is typical, sadly, of this debate, that people make comments about things without having the full spectrum of what's going on. And I thought the audacity of saying you're going to ridicule somebody for even talking to someone. Yeah, I've talked to Senator Sessions. I've talked to plenty of people in the Congress and the House. Most importantly, I've talked to my fellow colleagues, the governors of border states and the challenges they face. But most importantly, I've actually talked to American workers. I've talked to people not only in Wisconsin, but in New Hampshire, in Massachusetts, in Iowa, and South Carolina, places all across this great country. And what I think they crave more than anything, and I think this was missing from the last presidential election, people talked about likability. It wasn't about likability. What it was about was voters were hungry to make a change, but they wanted to have our Republican nominee clearly spell out what they were for, what our candidate was for, and how that would make their life better. And sometimes people mistakenly think that means more government. No, it's not about more programs, more government. More often than not, it's about getting government out of the way and saying how we're going to fight every single day for the hardworking American to make sure that every person in this country can live their piece of the American dream. And more often than not, that means getting government at the state, the local, and most important, the federal level out of the way. If we firmly make that case to the American people, I have no doubt we can have a Republican president after the 2016 election.
Governor Scott Walker, you've been following the Clinton scandal with their foundation. Now it turns out that only 12% of their money in 2013, $140 million worth of fundraising, only 12% of it went to actual charities, direct aid. There was quid pro quos all over the place. Some Republicans, Mitt Romney, Newt Gingrich, have said that they think their laws were broken. Do you think that there was bribery going on here in the Clinton Foundation?
Well, I don't know the details, and because I've been the subject of speculation about things that from people who didn't know the full case, I can't say that definitively. What I do say is that people should look into that there should be a thorough review. I think there are serious questions, not just on this issue, but go all the way back to former Secretary of State Clinton violating the rules that they applied to everybody else in the administration in terms of having an email set up, a separate server out there. And even if it wasn't top secret confidential, it certainly was sensitive information. Now we learn about other things related to money that foreign countries got. And I would say this, at a minimum, just take this, even giving them the benefit of the doubt, of which I think it's pretty difficult to do, even at that, at a minimum, even if no laws were broke, even if no rules were broken, how does someone not see this as a huge conflict of interest, if not outright in the law, but at least in appearance, that you have a personal foundation that benefits your family, that you're taking huge chunks of money from. At the same time, you've got another family member who's overseeing the policies of the United States as it pertains to foreign countries. I just think anyone, I think a freshman in high school taking an ethics course could see that that's a huge conflict of interest.
20% of the American uranium supply was put under control of the Russian government after Bill Clinton received a $500,000 speaking fee from a bank that was connected to the company that took over our uranium mines.
Well, that's my point. I think it's one of those where there certainly should be a thorough review, certainly a review both on criminal and ethics issues. But that aside, even if you assume none of that violates the law or the rules of the federal government, again, a freshman in an ethics course in high school could see that is a tremendous, tremendous conflict of interest. At a minimum, perceived conflict. To me, most people in politics and business and others who try to avoid conflicts of interest instead of bringing them on. And I think the sorry reality is you look over time, both with the former Secretary of State and with the former president, it seems to be in general there's a different set of rules for the Clintons than there is for everybody else in America. It's precisely why I think if we're going to win against Hillary Clinton, the best thing we can do is nominate someone who is new and fresh and offers the starkest contrast possible, somebody from outside of Washington who's completely removed from Washington, and someone who can say, I'm going to fight and win for the hardworking American people. We're going to take on these kind of challenges. We're going to take on these kind of special interest groups. We're going to make the case for the American people again.
Governor, isn't it more like there's no set of rules for the Clintons, and there is a set of rules for the rest of the American people?
Well, sadly, it seems like it. I mean, it's just this is story after story after story. We saw it in the 90s. We're seeing it reemerge again. I hope not just Republicans and conservatives, but I hope a lot of independents and the vast majority of independents and even some discerning Democrats look at this and say, why would we want to go down this path again? Why would we want to put someone in office with this kind of serious questions out there?
Governor, I wanted to ask you something. There's a story in the National Review, the new issue, and it's gotten a lot of play. It's already out on the website. You know the story I'm talking about. It was written by David French, Wisconsin's Shame. I thought it was a home invasion. And it was about this bogus political witch hunt that was mounted against you and various conservatives who were trying to reform the public bargaining system and just the whole state government in Wisconsin. And this story is just astounding, that it's the violations of civil rights that of all these people who disagreed with the unions, they were scapegoated. I mean, this was McCarthyism at its worst. Only it was left-wing McCarthyism. I mean, what is going to happen in this case?
Well, the good news off of this, and about the only thing that's good out of this, because as you mentioned, the story chronicles some pretty serious
civil rights violations.
Description, I should say, is a very serious thing. The good news is that now about 2 years ago, almost now, you've had a year ago, January, I guess it was about a year and a half, you had a well-respected former Court of Appeals judge acting at the circuit court level essentially said, shut this down. Said there had been a previous judge who allowed this to go forward. This judge came in, said, no, this is not good. Shut it down, stop it. The folks involved with this challenged this. It's now before the the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, and we have every belief, just as this well-respected judge ruled initially at the local level, it'll stay. It'll continue to be shut down. But in the meantime, you've had other federal courts acting on this, and you had a federal judge actually come down hard on some of these very issues that were raised. You had a Court of Appeals at the federal level that said, no, this case can't go forward.
You were the governor then.
Countersuit, but they did it only because they thought it belonged at the state level.
Could you have done anything?
This is one where I'm sure this is not the last we've heard of it.
Was there nothing you could do when this was going on? You were the governor when this much of this was going on, weren't you? All of it.
Well, this is all. I mean, this is the weird law that Wisconsin has called, John. You can't, by law, you can't know about any of this. You can't talk about any of this. You can't be involved in any of this. And they've gone after me and people connected to me for
sounds like a star chamber.
Going on 5 years.
It's just amazing. And the DA in Milwaukee, which is I think your home county as well,
right.
His wife was a teachers union shop steward. And she was angry about these union reforms that you were proposing, which, by the way, were backed by a vast majority of the public union members in Wisconsin, right? And in
the end, we won a recall election with more votes in June of 2012 than we did in the original election in November of 2010.
Well, it's just amazing what you've been up against to have this star chamber operating in complete secrecy, and these people who were being scapegoated, your supporters, they were told that they couldn't even speak to a lawyer, they couldn't speak to a reporter. They were just being intimidated by this not even a runaway grand jury, a runaway district attorney who recruited some of his fans. I mean, in North Carolina, you had a district attorney who tried to frame the Duke lacrosse team. He ended up in prison. Is Chisholm, the DA in Milwaukee, looking at any criminal charges, perhaps?
Well, there's been some talk in this countersuit by some of the folks involved with it. They went to court to point out that their rights were infringed upon, and you had a federal judge rule in their favor. The Court of Appeals eventually sent it back, not saying it was wrong, but rather saying it was really up to the discretion of the state Supreme Court. my belief is the state Supreme Court will actually hear this, and again, will shut it down. But then the real question becomes, what, if anything, happens after that? And that literally the jury's still out on that. But obviously, it raises some real red flags.
Boy.
It's part of the, beyond just that. You mentioned all that we've gone through. I mean, think about it. In the last 4 years, we've had over 100,000 protesters in and around our Capitol. We had threats. In fact, we had death threats against me, my family, lawmakers, against Republicans. We forget it was 4 years ago, but literally months after the Gabby Giffords shooting down in Arizona, which I and many other Republicans denounced and said was horrific, and said that people needed, that they could.
They went to your parents' house,
be for against things, but should never resort to violence or even threats of violence out there. And yet, months after all that happened, Wisconsin was filled with protest signs, many of which had pictures of me with crosshairs around them that had, signs that said, only good Republican is a dead Republican. It's an amazing, the double standard that's out there, but it is what it is. And what we've learned is they do that to try to intimidate particularly elected officials at any level of government. And the good news for us was we've been tested, and we didn't back down, and we ultimately won because of it.
And they cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to the state capitol, correct?
Oh, they caused damage to the Capitol. The recall elections cost tens of millions of dollars to run. The impact on the taxpayers, it was just one. But what they do, what we found, and you've talked about this before, is the left never stops. I mean, they went to court 10 times to try and stop our Act 10 reforms that took the power out of their hands and put it in the hands of the hardworking taxpayers. They will not stop. They will not back down. If they can't win in the ballot box, and they lost 3 times in my state in 4 years, they try to go to court. They use any means possible.
It's not settled law until they win, Governor. Remember that. It's not settled law until they win. And then it's, what are they coming back for? They've lost. We've got to take a break, Governor Scott Walker. Thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
Thank you. Anytime. I'm Howie Carr.